Hi and welcome to this brief recording. We've created a bit of a potted feedback workshop based on the Practice Educator event we did in April this year, and we wanted to share some of the insights with you, and I'm going to welcome my colleague.
I'm Louise Oliver and I'm course lead for Practice Education here at Bournemouth University.
And I'm Dray. I supervise placements and involved in practice education. So many of you will know us by face, and welcome if you're coming to listen to this today. We're going to give a brief outline of the workshop. Moving on the slide, lovely, thank you. Just welcome. We're going to look at feedback and feed forward today. So thinking about how we construct feedback for our students and our learners, thinking about feedback as the F word. So we're thinking about what underlies good practice and things to think about. We're also going to introduce some of the things around unconscious bias and have a think about the wonderful world of artificial intelligence. Okay, so what is feedback? Let's start with the basics. So we're thinking about actually what do we use feedback for, and it has a function and a form. So it's information that we provide as an agent by providing regarding aspects of one's performance or understanding. So feedback is the consequence of performance. So when we're thinking about it, we're thinking about feeding back on someone's performance, but we're thinking about much more deep things than that. So we're looking at more than just a corrective function. We're thinking about how somebody has worked, how their performance could be improved or developed, and acknowledging the strengths that they bring as well. So it may be that we may be restructuring their understanding in some way by giving that feedback. We're looking at factual accuracy, so things like around law and that kind of thing, where we notice there are errors, we can correct that in terms of factual stuff. But also, is more information needed? Is deeper reflection needed? Can we pose questions? And how can we help the students develop? And I think one of the most important things we found with feedback is just how can we make the feedback be heard by the student and the learner without triggering those defensive mechanisms that prevent us from learning. So we're looking at alternative ways of understanding or interpreting the situation potentially, and how feedback can contribute to that, to broaden the student's understanding.
It can also help the student to start to develop those skills of self-assessment. As they start to engage more with feedback, they start to then understand the areas of development, their strengths, and how they can feed that into the development. It's about shaping somebody into the social worker that they can be.
Absolutely. Okay, so what's the purpose of feedback? So similar really, it's about construction, so it has more than one purpose and it's useful as a tool to support learners in lots of different ways. So to improve knowledge, to improve skills, to develop their professional judgment, to increase their ability to self-reflect. And as part of the PCF, there is a big section on how to evaluate your practice. And I think we kind of skip over that in learning, or people evaluate their practice by identifying the things that are bad. And actually, when we're looking at evaluation, we're looking at the skill of evaluating in a more neutral way. So looking at the things that are both effective or that we might do differently. So there's a lot around the language we use around feedback. And it builds their ability to evaluate and drives their continued professional development. So that's one of the ways in which we can help them, again, build that self-awareness and build the skill of evaluation into their practice. Fundamentally, though, it's like getting to know your learner. If I move aside, there's a picture of a woman with a shadow, and it is about understanding what shadows your learner will bring with them in terms of their biography of experience. So your learner is going to bring their own strengths, abilities, experiences, maybe traumas, maybe things that have impacted their life that have a significant impact on the way they learn. So it's like a shadow, and it tells them what makes them tick and how they may respond to inevitable events while they're learning new things. So it's like a blueprint for learning, really. So it includes how they deal with setbacks, how they feel about mistakes, crucially, how they perceive and respond to feedback, and how they learn best. So we have a lot to do as practice educators to help our students and our learners to really understand themselves as a learner, not just learn the new things around them.
Help them navigate the learning journey, really.
Definitely. So developing understanding about how your learner emotionally and cognitively processes information and their experience. And important to pay attention to that strong emotional element, because sensory information is really, really crucial as in learners. And I think we focus on the cognitive aspects of learning, but don't focus on the sensory aspects and the emotional aspects that come as a result of that. And those are the things that really derail learners in their journey. So we also need to be aware of our learners' cultural backgrounds and how this forms part of their identity as a learner. So how their customs or practices or or understandings may differ, and what that brings for their learning journey. So the receptiveness to feedback is a massive issue, because we can give feedback, we can construct beautiful feedback, and somebody won't take it on board. We want to maximise the uptake of that learning. And that is for us about creating a really good learning environment, a place where people feel safe to be vulnerable. And actually we can borrow some of the learning around attachment theory to think about this. Now there's lots around adult attachment coming out, isn't there? And particularly around the learning relationship between practice educator and student. There's a massive area where the relationship can be quite difficult in terms of power, in terms of the assessor and the assessed. You feel quite frightened if you think about your own experiences of being a learner, and what it feels like to be assessed. There are things that we can do in the environment to make that better and easier. And this is a moment for us to invite you to reflect actually on what really makes a good learning environment, because if we get that right, that can really help.
And a lot of that's built around getting to know your learner. You can build that effective learning environment when you know your learner, you know where areas that they need scaffolding and extra support, and you know then when to pull that back a bit. That will help create and keep the effective learning environment, because it's actually going to shift and ebb and flow as they go through the learning journey. It's not great, we've got this safe space, job done. It's about actually how do you sustain it, and that is through flexibility in your thinking and understanding.
Yeah, and using the relationship is actually one of the best tools you can have within feedback and delivering that. So you want your students to feel secure. So if we look at the two areas of secure and insecure attachment is very much linked to what we call a growth mindset, where people are open to ideas, open to feedback, open to opportunity and taking a risk. And that's the space in which we want our students and learners to be. So we're using the capacity to explore developing professional self, learning new things, being open to doing that, and being aware that they will make mistakes, that mistakes are inevitable, and it's how we recover and manage that within that process. And working to give feedback, so open, creative thinking and challenging. So we want social workers that are open, creative, able to challenge, able to lead, able to reflect, evaluate the situation, evaluate themselves and their impact on it. If somebody is in an insecure space, it very much leads them to be quite dependent or maybe quite distant and withdrawn. So I've often had feedback, give feedback to students and they can appear quite guarded or withdrawn around that. We'll seek concrete explanations of just tell me the right thing to say in that situation, or a fear of making mistakes, and perceiving feedback as criticism rather than a helpful tool for their learning. And feedback should be like a two-way thing, and as an educator I think we're always open to that feedback, and yes, never, sometimes it doesn't feel comfortable, but it's a really necessary way to model with the student as well that it's okay to receive and give feedback.
Collaborative approach to any kind of learning is really important in practice education.
So fundamentally that is paying attention to the learning environment, the learning space, and by that I guess we mean supervision, so informal supervision, formal supervision,
even actually lunchtime with the team, anything can help create that effective learning environment, because it's how we all of us engage in the world and with each other. It's about how we interact. And that is at lots of different times. And we need to think carefully about those.
Car conversations.
Yes. Yes. Welcome to my office, my car.
Definitely. But thinking about the opportunities we can create. Okay. So feedback is about two things really, building on that. It's about content of feedback and it's about the relationship. So it's about, the content is about what you intend or want to say. So making that really clear and constructive. So feedback needs to lead someone to be able to know how to develop. So we need to give them the tools. So we can say something didn't work as well, but we need to say why and what they could consider maybe differently, or what their ideas were, or if they looked at the situation again. And the relationship is about how it's said, so what and how. And that's what the meta communication is. So what may be experienced between you and the person receiving the feedback. So what is that meta communication in your relationship? And we know relationships between practice educators and students and learners can be difficult because it's an assessor and assessed relationship, and that creates its own challenges. So in feedback, try to stay focused on the content, but be aware of how you're communicating it. So think about what it says about the nature of your relationship, and by that we mean language. So thinking about the terms and the way it's delivered. Thinking about words that might be red flags. Thinking of words that might be triggers for a student in terms of that sort of guarded response. And in the PE student relationship, it means it's important to be mindful around the inevitable power imbalance, because we know there is a power imbalance, but we can make things better and shape things in a way that feel more collaborative. Certainly the way we look at education is that we're not educating empty vessels, we're educating people with different experiences, skills and strengths to bring, and how we shape that is important. Okay, we learn stuff along the way.
All the time, yeah.
So we have to be careful about language and how things might be unintentionally communicated through that. And that's about being aware of our own personal bias, and that's stuff you're going to touch on in a minute, Lou. So feedback has a strong relational component, and many problems can arise. People feel that there's a need to defend or attack. So if we create a safe space, there's more chance of that feedback sinking in. We want them to be a sponge and not to filter it out. So this leads me to sort of come to the end of my part, really, thinking about holistic assessment and what role feedback has, because for our students and learners, we create a portfolio of evidence, well, they create a portfolio of evidence, and our job as practice educators is to review that portfolio in its whole state. Holistic assessment review means reviewing the whole, not the sum of its parts. So whilst we're marking and individually feeding back on pieces of work, we're also at the same time keeping our mind on the breadth of the portfolio and what that says about the picture of the student's progress. So the role of the practice educator is looking at individual components of the feedback and the portfolio, and be able to see how this fits into the overall picture. So for example, between direct observations 1, 2 and 3, there should be a steady progress. So it's okay that if each piece of work isn't perfect as such, or there's development to come from each piece of work, that's okay if we see that trajectory of development over the course of the portfolio. So we're thinking horizontally as well as vertically. So part of your assessment is about how feedback is utilised as well, and how the students are using that for their growth. You want to see the students using your feedback as a bit of a narrative for their learning, so that they're taking on board those aspects of learning which are really going to help them develop their practice. So it's dynamic, it's not static, and that's what they take into their future practice. And being able to do that means they're going to use supervision better, it means they're going to respond to feedback and actually take the valuable nuggets out of the feedback and utilise those to improve their practice. Okay, so it's a journey, where I went, how I'm going, and where to next.
Okay, so we're just going to have a little look at unconscious bias and how that can influence feedback. So just a quick introduction into what unconscious bias is. Yep. So unconscious bias is that, or also known as implicit bias, is the way that how our brain makes those quick judgments. We always teach this a lot in social work. So, we ask people, who out there is judgmental, and I'm always like, yeah. Because people are judgmental, but it's actually about then, as we know, catching those judgments, challenging those judgments, working out their root causes and making sense of that as we go forward. It does affect everyone. And this is true in practice education. Unconscious bias does influence us in our society. So no matter how much we think that we are aware of our bias, we won't be. There'll be many unconscious bias that are affecting us. As I always explain, I'm a white, highly educated woman who lives in the UK. Therefore, I know that I'm afforded an awful lot of privileges as that. So no matter how much I'm trying to unpick all my unconscious bias and the privileges, I probably will never manage to in my lifetime, because there's so many that I haven't managed to notice. And every now and then one comes and smacks me in the face. I'm like, oh, why didn't I notice that? It does influence us. And we are working within the society with these influences. And that's why we need to work really hard to pull out those deeply ingrained biases that we hold. Because that will influence how we engage with practice educators, with our learners in practice as practice educators, because those unconscious biases are there in our minds, and we are then going on to assess the learners in practice. Therefore, we can't help but have that that can have an influence. So one particular theory that I like to bring in is a very simple one called Halo-Horns effect. And actually that came from Thorndike back in the 20s, but it's a really nice one to help us kind of unpick it. The notion being that in the first moment that we meet somebody, we make a snap judgment about them, whether we like them or whether we don't. And that comes from lots of different things. It could be the way how they're dressed, it could be that they remind you of somebody else, it could be something that they've said. It can be lots of different aspects. But in that then, we hold on to that notion of whether we see them as positive or negative, and that will then influence the rest of the time that we work with them because of that. So actually we need to really think about this when we're working with people. Do our judgments change them? Are we being evidence-based in our thinking, in our evidence gathering? Are we making sure that we're not holding on to some unconscious bias that's come out of nowhere or actually come from our past or an experience that we've had, and that we're challenging that so that we are being fair in our assessment? If we stagnate, that becomes problematic and dangerous as well. So we need to think about that. So these are some reflective questions that I've pulled together and adapted from Partridge in 2019 that I just welcome people to engage with really. So what narratives do you have as a supervisor about that learner practice? So what stories, what thinking are you holding on to? What are their strengths and abilities? Really start to unpick those. Don't just stop at, oh, this. Really start to unpick and explore those. What are you curious about them that you've never dared to ask them? And actually that is something which I love and hate that question, because it actually reminds me of where I find sitting with being uncomfortable I struggle with. And there are some things you might want to ask people and they have to pluck up the courage to have that sensitive conversation, but actually have it. What might be useful to explore, which has not been talked about? What is being said by the learner in practice, but not being heard? And that's about you reflecting and thinking very carefully about why you think they might not be hearing it. Are they not hearing it? Is it how you're interpreting what you're seeing, feeling? And are your discussions and feedback empowering or constraining? And that goes really back to what Roz is talking about earlier, about actually the power of feedback, the pleasure of giving feedback when it's engaged with and it's working well, but actually when we give feedback, are we accidentally, due to our unconscious bias, constraining the learner or practice in some way, not recognizing a strength in them that maybe we don't see in ourselves, if that makes sense. Yeah. So just having a think about how we can address this unconscious bias, or start to address it, because this is a lifelong journey. But at work, things that can get in the way of us spending time to reflect and consider this is when we're just plain too busy. So social work, very busy profession, so we make very quick snap decisions based on sometimes our heuristic thinking, but actually, and then we go back and then start to make sense of it. So we need to find time to slow down, and I know that's hard, so I do get it. Thinking that you're an expert over above having expertise, there is a difference. So think very much about, yes, you have expertise over certain areas, but actually that doesn't give you the power and authority to be
position yourself as the expert.
Yeah, but I was saying it potentially become quite oppressive in your practice if you're not careful. So it's about then, and I'm recognising other people's expertise as well and bringing that into it as well.
It prevents the student from kind of going, oh, can I check this idea out with you? If you feel someone is that expert.
If they're a bit scary because of it, absolutely. Yeah, I remember being training myself, and I remember feeling quite, almost like I couldn't ask certain questions because I was like, oh, but they're so amazing and they know all this stuff, and they're just going to think I'm silly or stupid. And if I ask this question, actually, when I did pluck up the courage, they were very welcoming, and that was what made the difference. And find that time to question and reflect on our decisions when we've made them. So at work, we need to respond rather than react. I'm often telling myself that. Spend time, think about it and respond. Don't react in the moment. Take your time, slow down your thinking about the words we use. Words can be empowering, words can also disempower. So think very carefully about that. As I said earlier, value other people. So work collaboratively. Collaborative practice education is really key, and it will help you as practice educators and supervisors grow as well as a learner in practice. And it supports autonomous learning, self-assessment as well. And engage in that regular critical reflection, either with peers or with your mentor assessors, whoever that is, as well as with your learner in practice. You can role model it with them. Okay.
Can I just, when I running out of battery? We're on 20 minutes. Just so you know.
Let's get brief.
Yes.
Cool, okay.
So we're just going to finish by talking a little bit about marking and feedback in the digital world, because for us at university this has become much more of a reality, and AI is taking over the world.
Yes.
So unfortunately we haven't got robots for marking, but that's
Not yet.
unfortunate. Not yet. So AI has some practical uses. It helps people maybe improve grammar or spelling or structuring work.
Yes.
Especially if English isn't a first language, it can be an incredibly useful tool.
Or if you're neurodiverse and you
you're
struggle with
neurodiverse.
structure.
Absolutely. So any kind of learning differences
Yeah.
that people may have. But it does come with its disadvantages in terms of questioning the integrity of the student's work, potentially for us academic offences, or hindering the development of independent research skills and critical reflection. And we really want students to be developing those skills.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about the use of AI where it's permitted, and also just pose a couple of questions. Okay, so generative AI, generally speaking, is not something we should be encouraging our students to use. We don't want a machine doing the thinking for them. However, if you need to gain a basic understanding or develop a case study or have ideas around structuring your work, spelling, grammar, language, task completion, or researching a topic initially, it can be a helpful tool. Yes. It's not something to replace their skills in research, because we want them to be research-minded, be looking at stuff and being interested and curious mainly.
Engaging with the materials.
Definitely. Yeah. So there are some tasks at university that they've started to say no generative AI is permitted, or that generative AI can be used. We haven't gone as far in practice education with that, but this is just something for us to be mindful of in terms of tools students are using around their work. So the uses of AI, we need to be pragmatic. It's with us, we are using it. So what we ask is for students to acknowledge if they're using it, being open and honest about it and saying, actually, I've used this to structure my work, and saying how they've used it, if they have used it. It's not acceptable to generate AI. And one thing I became aware of this week is if we're using information, it could be case sensitive, and we don't know where that information goes if we're using AI. So we have to be secure around the use of AI and what information we're putting into ChatGPT or similar. There are more and more research articles around this, but the jury is out. We're no experts on AI, and we are feeling our way at the university in terms of what's acceptable and what isn't. But what feels acceptable in terms of thinking about professionalism and integrity and the value base that we have, the work needs to be the student's own. And we want to hear and see the student's process of working and thinking things. Now, there is a link to Mr. and Samuel produced an article on the future of AI and how social work is using AI. Many of you will be using Copilot and similar, and it's a hot topic with pros and cons. So in terms of feedback and marking, we just need to be mindful of it. And finally, I think we're going to bring out some of our tips, sharing some of our tips, our learning curves of educators, because we're people that mark a lot of stuff. So Lou, do you want to kick off and we'll just run through it?
Okay, so feedback is a dialogue, is a conversation between two people. It's part of a journey. Even in the written feedback, you are sharing your thoughts. I often like to write, I wonder, and then I pose a thought in my feedback on something. If, it's not that they've done something right or wrong particularly, but it's something like, let's have a think about this together. So I like to do that. It is a journey.
Definitely. So marking and constructive feedback is easy, really easy to notice the things that need improvement or you may think are incorrect or do not meet your expectations. So be careful of balance. It's important to acknowledge strengths as well and think about it from the reader's perspective. So I always reread my feedback to make sure it's not I've just picked out things that I think could be changed.
Absolutely. It can be really vulnerable making to share your work with somebody else. Actually, I still dread sharing my work with other people, especially if I haven't had a chance to really carefully construct it. So being aware of that, support people when they share their work with you, do not criticise.
Absolutely. So writing in professional practice is a skill that is developed career long. They don't just magically become perfect writers at the point of qualification. So be mindful your assessment addresses the level your learner is at. So good enough is good enough, and we're not looking for perfection.
Don't impose too high standards on anybody for their writing or what they're doing either. Back to Rosa's point, it's a journey, so just be aware of your own expectations and then be aware of what level you are assessing them at, and make sure you're assessing them at that level, not at what you think they should be doing.
Absolutely. Respond and not react.
Yes.
So try writing to the person. I think that personalises it. So address it to them so it feels personal and considered, and then it feels like a conversation.
When you're having to deliver a difficult message, as we all do at different points, just think carefully about how that is. The really important moment is you haven't developed a skill yet. It's the yet which is really important. It shows somebody that you believe that they can make those changes, and it helps empower them then to take that step forward, to have the courage to try again.
Absolutely, bridging the learning gap and doing it kindly. So considering how you might feel if you were receiving the feedback you were given, so pass it through the filters of, is it helpful, constructive and kind?
And finally, feed forwards help the student connect to future progress. Even if it is amazing, there are always ways you can encourage, reach and stretch. Just remember that. I think our big thing is be kind and be supportive.
Absolutely. And I think just remember what it was like for you. Absolutely. So our final note is a note of thanks. We have some references to share, which we'll just skip through, but you're welcome to pick up any of those references. And a big thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.